Anyone who believes in indefinite growth on a physically finite planet is either mad or an economist.
We don't want to focus politics on a notion that involves the rejection of principles around which a large majority of our fellow citizens organize their lives.
We are not as endlessly manipulable and as predictable as you would think.
Copernicus advanced a very different way of thinking, the heliocentric model. And he went about his findings in a very scientific, very rational manner until 50 years later, when Galileo appeared on the scene. And Galileo had come to many of the same conclusions as Copernicus, but approached the conversation in a very different manner. He perfected and refined the telescope so that common man could see with their own eyes the differences in terms of the structure of the planets and the sun. He partnered with artists and sculptors to create works of art to depict his new way of thinking. He wrote a book, but not a scientific one that was written in common language that described a dialogue between two common men about the two different worldviews. The net of the story is Galileo is the one who's credited with being the inventor of modern science. Right? And Galileo is the one that Queen, in their timeless rock anthem, Bohemian Rhapsody, referred to. And so as we at CEB think about innovation and our collective effort to find the next new blockbuster product or service, process, business model, there are three key things that we fail to do, which I'm going to touch on very briefly in the next few minutes. The first is we fail to identify the right people. Innovation gurus and authors would have us believe that innovation can and should be part of everyone's job. However, what often happens when something is everyone's responsibility is that it leaves no one accountable for pulling it off. This is precisely the situation that Whirlpool, a North American-based manufacturing company in the appliance industry, faced just a few years ago. As we entered a global recession, the appliance industry went into a depression. In order to achieve tangible results, Whirlpool created and established transparent innovation benchmarks across their various businesses. And here's a remarkable component. They actually had individual business leaders literally sign their name to a document saying that the products and services and ideas that they were developing would qualify as an innovation because they presented a unique and compelling customer solution. Because of this, Whirlpool not only survived the last 5 years, they're doing quite well and received a number of innovation awards. We now need to make sure they focus on the second thing to get right, which is the right problem. Literally, the 24-hour-old Mondelez International formed yesterday. They're the love child of the Kraft Cadbury acquisition. They plan to continue a practice employed by the folks at Kraft over the last few years by using a scorecard which prioritizes the selection and funding of ideas with the highest and most equally distributed scores on market, technology, and business merits. Mondelez believes that by selecting the right problem, one that customers, business leaders, and research scientists agree upon, is the key to developing balanced opportunities and breakthrough platforms. Now, doing all these things requires people in the organization to set the right priorities and take risks, which is the third thing we're focusing on, to try something new that might fail. Thomas Watson Sr. said, the fastest way to succeed is to double your failure rate. This mantra is exactly what the Indian organization Tata has taken into hold. Now, Tata has put into place what they call the Dare to Try Award. It's granted to the individual who's the brave innovator who went the extra mile, someone who might have failed, but did not fail to try. Now, for each of us individually, I'd like to issue a challenge. Let's think back 5 years ago in our careers. We were a little bit more junior and a little bit younger, and perhaps we had a moment like Copernicus, where our ideas were a bit ahead of the times. But what I would recommend, and what I would challenge each of us to do, is to dust off some of those innovation ideas, some of those things that we were excited about back just a few years ago. And let's see if we can involve the right people. Let's see if we can address the right challenge. And let's create the right priorities to create transformational innovation, which will hopefully leave all of us singing. Should I sing? Galileo! Come on.
Please don't. you're talking about innovation being something which is built into accountability, into performance management. It almost sounds like you're saying, right, you've got a week to have a great idea, which it kind of feels counterintuitive.
It does. But unless we assume that we can put measures and accountability, timeframes, and some science and rigor around the innovation process, we're then at the whimsy of another genius appearing on the scene. Innovation doesn't have to limit itself to the breakthroughs, right? The big changes. Sometimes small changes add up systematically to that long-term win.
Great. Yeah. Sticking broadly to the order that we've set, Kevin.
So Premier Farnell is a £1 billion FTSE 250 business-to-business distributor of electronic components. So we supply all the bits that are inside those smartphones, the semiconductors, etc., etc. We've got a brand in Europe called Farnell, but right around the globe, we're changing our name to Element 14. As a distributor, we're basically selling stuff other people can sell as well. We're not selling something unique. So we have to innovate in order to differentiate our business and win share from the competition. The first example is a community site. So 3 years ago, as part of our brand strategy, we deliberately launched a community for design engineers called the Element 14 Community. Nobody knew we were going to globally rebrand at that stage, but that was the strategy. 3 years later, we're getting around 140,000 visitors a week. There are 125,000 registered members, and we've even got our own TV show. We run a thing called the Ben Heck Show. Ben modifies finished electronics and turns them into other gadgets. For our Halloween episode, Ben created a T-shirt that you could see through. It had a screen on the front, a camera on the back, and the wearer effectively looked like you could see straight through their chest. So, this is not what you would expect from a distributor of electronic components, but we backed it. And it's great fun, but it's great fun with a real serious business purpose. It drives tremendous traffic to our main transactional sites. It's got us huge brand awareness for the Element 14 name as part of our brand transition, and it's driving customer acquisition. It's bringing new people into our franchise. The second innovation that I'll tell you about is a thing called the Raspberry Pi microcomputer. So Raspberry Pi is a bare board computer that we retail for 25 quid, and you plug it into a keyboard and your TV set, and it allows you to do the sort of programming that I grew up with on things like a BBC Micro. Now, the Raspberry Pi is not our invention. It was invented by a charitable foundation, the Raspberry Pi Foundation, but because of our position in the industry, we were offered the chance to be one of 2 global distributors. And that then created the problem. Raspberry Pi has brought down my website a few times. It is very popular. The demand has been tremendous. And we've had to learn how to cope with that, how to sell to consumers, how to do customer service on social media. But it's also allowed us to leverage our own community, the Element 14 community, to do some of that customer service, to have the latest, greatest things you can do with the Raspberry Pi, and it's brought in tremendous traffic to our own community. About 6-7 years ago, there was a piece of boring legislation that hit the electronics industry. We completely embraced it because we fundamentally believed in it, which removed lead and other hazardous substances from electronics. The way we tackled that piece of legislation, treating it as an opportunity rather than a problem, basically reinvented us as sort of thought leaders with design engineers around the globe. Because we'd reinvented ourselves as thought leaders, we had the credibility to launch the industry's first community. Because we launched the industry's first community, we had a platform to put videos up about Raspberry Pi, discussions about Raspberry Pi, bring the conversation into our environment and make a success of that. And because of what we've done through Raspberry Pi in the community, we're now looking at a different approach to customer service, not just in third-party social media, but bringing customer service into our own space. So these things are tremendously joined up. And I think the last piece is this piece around the right people. The pride and excitement of 4,000 or 5,000 people, every single employee, when they see us in mainstream media, when they see us launch a community, when their neighbours saying, oh, you're the ones that sell the Raspberry Pi. That enthusiasm is just, you can't put a price tag on it. It's incredible. And suddenly, the whole organisation is innovating. Everybody's got an idea. It might be an innovation in how they approach their day-to-day job. It could be the next huge thing. But what it does in terms of the culture, we've found absolutely tremendous. So I'll call it there, Matthew.
Thank you, Kevin. And Atul was talking about the balance between markets, business and technology, but in your account there's a stronger kind of sense of social purpose. What's this kind of balance of the innovation which is right just for you in the market, the next increment, the next thing that generates profit, and the mobilisation of a community that probably are more interested in solving the big problems out there, or just innovating because it's fun?
We move small, highly valuable electronics around the globe very quickly, which versus carbon emissions, etc., we have to challenge ourselves, can we do this differently? We've got a whole strategy looking at virtual electronics, at selling software programs, at looking at solutions that design engineers may want to use 2-3 years down the road, so it is a more sustainable future. But I certainly agree the community that we've seen grown up on the Element 14 site, the challenges they want to embrace, the problems that they want to solve, they do have a bigger world in mind. It isn't just, how do we make a quick buck?
Great, thank you for that. So over to Richard Palmer. Richard.
My original invention came actually from a Kenwood mixer. And I was working part-time at a university at the time, so I had the access to a lot of test equipment. So I developed a rig, and I messed around with a Kenwood mixer and lots of polymers. I'm not a chemist. I understand how things work to a point, but I absolutely do not understand how chemistry works. I eventually made something which did work, and I then took it to a very large sort of chemical company and said, look, this is amazing. Why don't you give me some money for it? Why don't you take a license for it? And I should have kept the letter, but they basically said, well, there isn't a market for something like that. If there was a market for it, we would have been asked for it. And if we'd have been asked for it, we'd have developed it. And then, so once I'd invented it and realised I couldn't take a quick win license opportunity with it, I then said, well, what can I do with it? So I filed a patent, and filing a patent is a very, very cheap use of £80 to understand what else is out there. You can do your own patent search, but you can effectively have that done for you for the privilege of writing a patent application. And then I was fortunate that I had a twin brother who works in corporate finance, so he understood how to write a business plan. I didn't. So I sort of borrowed that knowledge. I tried to raise finance. It took me 18 months, and I ended up I sold everything, my car, everything. And I was lucky enough to inspire a guy who was running Spider, who make the ski race suits for the Canadian and American ski teams. The second person who I inspired was a skateboarder who worked for Globe, and they produced some skate shoes with it in the insole. And that really sort of turned it from being let's say, a concept to a product in a small form. And for me, that sort of stage of how to get value out of an invention, or if you like, an idea, is about really, it's all about the story, and it's all about gaining believers and the right believers in the story. In the end, I raised 8 million, and we grew it to a business which is profitable. Innovation for me is something new which has got value. New, creative, possible, future, value, measured, analytical, today. And those things are really quite opposite. One's a creative, sort of, let's say, additive process, and one's an analytical, deductive, shrinking process. And the challenge really is to change your structure of let's say, consideration or judgment. If you're too near today, then you can measure. But if you really want to do something further out, you have to believe. And it's about persuading, and it's about inspiring and engaging with people in that belief structure. It's really about recognizing that there's a world which is what is, and there's a world which is what could be, and most people don't spend much time in the world of what could be.
Thank you, Richard. Atul mainly talked about innovation within organisations. Mm-hmm. I'm just interested, in all the people you approached over all the years, did you come to recognise certain characteristics for those people who were open-minded?
They want to de-risk their investment with a financial argument or a risk analysis. And that's a very sort of rigorous and analytical process. But what it does is it sort of removes personal judgment. You know, I'm always amused by sort of senior managers who want to have all the information so they don't need to be there. Because the difficult decisions, which are the senior decisions, are the ones where you don't have enough information. And I think it's about finding people that are capable of making a personal judgment because they believe in something, as opposed to an independent judgment because they can measure something.
Great. Scott.
Thank you. So first off, certainly want to take the opportunity to thank you guys for coming to listen to some of our thoughts today. Probably the best way to sort of frame what I really do beyond just R&D or research and development is what I call technology injection. It's sort of a nice, cute way of saying that I look for new and emerging technologies, look for ways to apply them in meaningful ways, ideally at the right time, at the right place, to the right people. We firmly believe the best and the brightest ideas may actually come from outside of our individual research team or even outside of our organization. So we spend an awful lot of time systematically working with external folks, whether it be the vendor community, the VC community, and certainly academia. So on one hand, you have this endless supply, quote unquote, of new technologies that are just waiting to be applied in a meaningful way to ideally create a competitive advantage, to create new value for our shareholders and such. And on the other hand, you have, this demand where you have new opportunities that are seemingly arising everywhere, whether it be in the emerging markets or even in traditional markets. Visa has offices literally all over the world. And certainly from a cultural standpoint, the notion of actually sharing ideas and sharing new approaches and methodologies and actually putting yourself forward and saying, this is my idea, is sometimes foreign for certain cultures. What we found, however, was that those same cultures that we thought wouldn't be presenting those ideas, actually are usually the first ones to raise up their hands and say, hey, look, I have a great idea that might be applied in a meaningful way in this other domain or this other market. So a couple of just quick results for you guys. In the last year and a half, we had 31 total events. Out of 6,800 staff, we had close to 3,000 participants. We had 1,900 what we call on-demand views, and what that means simply is these are folks who actually couldn't attend the event in real time because maybe they were sleeping because it's 2 o'clock in the morning in Singapore, but they are participating what we call asynchronously, either be, again, watching the webcast after the fact or participating via blogs and forums and such. It's interesting, one of the things my boss often reminds me of relative to motivating my staff, which are highly technical individuals, is that typically for most technical staff, they want to collaborate, they want to exchange ideas, and quite frankly, from a motivational standpoint, after a base level of compensation is actually achieved, what they're more interested in actually is in the notion of learning, mastery, and purpose. So it's not more stock options, it's not additional bonuses, it's really around that mastery and that sense of purpose. And so what we try to do with the Technology Focus Group program is to facilitate that, to allow folks who are experts in certain domains, certain fields, to actually mentor the more junior staff. And so far, the results have been very promising. We launched this thing called the Ideas Festival, which was designed to basically, in a systematic way, engage all of the staff, regardless of geographic location or organizational affiliation, level, and actually have a program in place, an initiative in place that allows staff members to actually contribute ideas, new ideas for new services, new products, process improvements. And the other thing we also try to play with relative to the Ideas Festival is that some people, admittedly, they'll say, I'm not an innovator. That's just not who I am. However, I love to solve problems. So what we ended up having is actually one of our senior executives, the global head of product, Jim McCarthy, actually posed what we call an executive challenge. So basically, a very discrete problem. I'm trying to solve this one problem over in this one developing market. Go. And again, the results were outstanding. Out of 6,800 staff, we had close to 3,800 staff participate and actually engage in a manner that was consistent with what we're looking for relative to innovation. And so, often the question is, usually as part of the conversation, okay, that's nice. Everyone got to sort of submit an idea and got to sort of say yay or nay, but was there any real, tangible value back to the shareholder value question, right? Well, I'm happy to report that we've already taken a number of these ideas and actually already started incubating these within our Visa research, basically Visa labs. And so hoping to see maybe a year from now some new services and product offerings to share back with you guys. Creating a culture of innovation, actually harnessing the power of your staff is very, very important for us. Thanks for your time.
And Scott, one of the themes that I think has run through the whole conversation is this issue of the relationship between innovation and incentives. from what you're describing, that the incentive to participate is to do with kind of wanting to work with your peer group and wanting to make an impact on service. But how did you see the model of incentivizing people to engage in this process?
Yeah, it actually, I'll be honest with you, it sort of morphed. It's like, we didn't know what we didn't know. So early on, because we didn't have a very large budget to actually support these programs and initiatives, it was very much, hey, here's an opportunity to show what you know, right? And very, very quickly, you had a number of people who sort of stood up and said, hey, in fact, I do know a fair amount, but I'd like to learn more about other things. And so that is actually my incentive, is I'm going to give back to the community and hope the community gives back to me. So very much the notion of prosumers was very, very heavy for us.
Great, thank you.